Hey, hello friends, I'm back with a new Flutter tutorial, and today we're going to be creating this sort of animated clock in Flutter. We'll be learning about the basics of animation in Flutter using the animation controller, and the tween. So it's going to be a fairly long tutorial, and so let's get started. Okay, so now we are in a new Flutter project created in Android Studio. So I have all the basic structure here with the main.dart file open on the right hand side. I'll select all the code and accept the top two lines, I guess. Okay, so I'll delete all the code. And so we need to create a new material app in the run app method. I'll create a new material app. Give it a title of my clock with a home screen. Okay, so now we want to create a home screen. Class home screen that extends a stateful widget. In this case, we want it to be a stateful widget because we want to use animation in it, and animation is sort of revolving around the change in values. So our values will be changing from 0.5 to 5, and the page that is open needs to reflect the changes to the user. So we're gonna use a stateful widget. So we'll add the overrides. So okay, so first we want to create a new state for it. We'll create class home screen state that extends state of type home screen. Okay, so we want to add the overrides. Okay, so the home screen is a stateful widget, and that does return a state from the create state function. So for this home screen, we want to create a state, obviously. Okay, so we create a home screen state class that extends the state of type home screen, and there is the build method that is mostly in the stateless widget override. So this is the build same build method here. Okay, so in the build method we'll return a scaffold. So in the scaffold we'll add a new app bar, and in the title we'll add new text widget that just says clock. So at this point nothing interesting is happening, and we want to return here the home screen state. Okay, so when I save the application and run it on the emulator, you see that there is an error. Let me see that. Tag 0 in comma exceeded a procedure, a constructor, or a function. Okay, I think I need to restart the app once again, and here we want to add a new function, home screen state super dot okay, okay, so now as the app is running there, okay, so what we want to do is now we want to take this clock to the center of the app bar so that it just becomes like the demo I showed you. Okay, so now in the app bar, here it is, I'll just wrap the text around the center object so that the text is now in the center of the app bar. You can see that right here. Okay, so now I'll add a new, I'll change the color of the background first. So in the body of the scaffold, I'll add a new container. So in the container, I change the width and height of the container. So for the width, I'll add media query dot of context dot size dot width. Okay, so this is the way of getting the width of the screen using the media query dot of the context of this application dot size dot width. In the same way, we can get the height of the screen for the container. So I'll say height here, and in the height I'll change in the container. I'll change the height this way. So I'll add change the background color to I'll change the background color to colors dot what should I make it? I'll make this deep orange. And now when I save it, you can see that the whole of the background is of deep orange color. The container has filled whole of the screen that is being shown to the user. So we want to change the app bar also. So in the app bar, I'll just add a background color. I'll do this below the title so that it looks more organized. Okay, background color, colors dot deep orange, and I'll save that. Okay, so now you'll see that there is some sort of elevation, a drop down on the app bar. That is the default way the app bar is shown to the user. So we'll make the elevation to 0.0. So basically elevation is the property that that adds that depth, that shadow effect to the material widget. So I'll make that 0.0 so that the app the shadow is gone. So we have a uniform screen here. We could have added this clock text other ways without adding this app bar, but I sort of thought that this is kind of an easy process. We don't need to add the padding from the other widgets, so I'm just going with this way. Okay, so in the body I have a container, that is this. So in the container I'll now be adding a child. I'll make this center, and in the center I'll be adding another container. I'll be adding another column. Okay, so what the idea is that we'll be having this sort of screen, and in the center of the screen we'll be adding another container, another column. So the column will be having two columns, one for the clock, the digital clock, and the bottom column for showing the pendulum. Okay, so in the column I'll add the first child to be a simple material. Okay, in the column I'll add the children property, and in the children I'll add the material. Sorry, only material, and I'll add the child to material of container. Okay, so why have I added this container child to the material? So that the material does not have any size of itself, so we want to add some sort of width and height to the material, and we'll do that using the container, and we'll give this container a width of 320 and a height of 320 also. So, and we'll change the color of the material to colors dot brown dot shade 900. Okay, so this is sort of a way of adding different shades of a single color. In most of the cases you say that colors dot yellow, colors dot green, yeah, brown, and all sort of things. So when you can also add shades to different to the color that you select. In this case I say brown dot, so that gives me a number of options that I can choose from. So shade 900, shade 100, and there are many other options, shade 200, 300, 400, and so on. So I'll add the shade of 900 here. Sorry, 900, and brown, just, okay, sorry, shade 900. Okay, so when I save this, you can see that we have a nice brown colored box below the clock app bar. So what we want to do next is we want to round the corners of this box. Okay, so in the material we'll have the property border radius. We'll add a new border radius dot all for all sides of the material, and here we'll add radius dot circular, and we'll add a radius of 50.0, just so that we have nice clean borders, nice rounded borders here. So I'll just save that and we'll open. So now we have rounded borders for this material, and now what we want to do is we want to add some sort of shadow from this brown color to the background. So we'll do that using the same property that we used in the app bar. We'll add some elevation to the material, and we'll keep this as the box is of large size, so we'll keep this 20. 20.0, and we'll save this. And now you see that we have a nice shadow, but the shadow is quite dull here, so I'll just decrease the size of it to 15 and save it. Okay, and even less. Okay, 10. Okay, so we have a nice shadow in the background. It is quite light, but you can just see it, barely see it. When we'll add other objects, it might be more apparent here. Okay, so now we have this sort of material here, but what we want to do is we want to add a clock here. So I'll add the child to the container. I'll add the child and make this text. Okay. So what do we want for the text? We want the text to display a string of date. We'll not display the date. We'll display only the hour and the minutes of the clock. Okay, so I'll just create a new function here, just for the sake of it. Current time, that will return some string of current time. So I'll call this so we'll say okay, so we'll add date time dot now dot hours, hour, and hour, and with a semicolon, with a colon here, and date time dot now dot minutes. Okay, so I'm basically using this string injection sort of thing here, where I just use $sign and 2 curly braces to contain the code that needs to be evaluated before being added to the string. Okay, so I'm using datetime.now.hour and datetime.now.minute to just add the sort of time to the string with a colon in between. So there is underscore current time. The underscore makes this a private function so that this function cannot be used out of this class. This is sort of a Dart way of creating private functions. Okay, so now I'll use this function in the text here. I'll just pass current time and I'll save this, and there is time here just sort of in the upper top left corner. This is kind of really small in size, so we'll add some style to the text. We'll add style using text style, and here we'll use font size. We'll make this quite a bigger, 70.0 maybe, and color of okay, I'll use the color. We'll make the color of this colors.white, and we'll use font weight, a new font weight of bold. Okay, so now when I save this, you can see that the time is nice and clean, quite big in size, so that it can be easily seen. So at this time, the time is kind of aligned to the top left corner of the box, the material box. So we'll wrap the text with the new center object, center widget. So when I save this, you can see that the time is in the center of the material widget. So now we come to the main portion of this tutorial, when we need to add a pendulum, a ticking pendulum below the actual time. So here what we want to do is, in the column where the material ends, we want to add another object, another widget. We want to add a container. Okay, so in the container I'll make the I'll add a new child. So this child will be an image.asset. Okay, so right now we don't have any images in the project, so I'll just comment this line out for a second. I'll just save the project at its current state and see that everything is working. And there is some error that that there is only one digit being shown here. We can fix that, but we'll just apply a small patch to just cover this tutorial. Okay, so you can just there is more code to be written to display the time properly than this single line of code. So I think you understand this, and you'll just customize this yourself if you want to use this in some sort of application or something. So for now, we'll add a new image here. I'll just comment out all the tests as we're not going to use them right now. Okay, so I'll just add a new folder here. In the new, I'll add a new directory. I'll call this images and click OK. So now for the images, I do have a single pendulum that I sort of designed in Photoshop. It's not quite the best pendulum in the world, so it's kind of a no-brainer. Okay, so I'll just copy this and I'll go to the images folder and I'll just paste it. So the images now have a pendulum.png. I'll go to the pubspec.yml file. Sorry, not the log file. In the pubspec.yaml file. So here I'll just uncomment the assets, and I'll set the indentation of these so that in the pubspec.yaml file there is the indentation plays a huge role. If you just add an extra space, the whole file will get corrupted, and it will show you errors in the run for the Android Studio. So I'll just use the pendulum.png. I'll add that to the assets with a dash and a space, images/pendulum.png. I'll save that, and thank God it's saved completely. And now I'll go to the main.dar file, and here I'll click on get dependencies. There is no just dependency, I just want to clear that upper bar. So in the okay, so here where we have commented out the images.asset, I'll just uncomment that, and here I'll add the path for the image. So the path will be images/pendulum.png. So right now, if I save this and I run this on the emulator, you can see that the pendulum, there is an error with the black and yellow stripes. So this states that there is not enough space to display all the assets that you want to display on the screen. So there is basically lack of space. So what we want to do is we want to make the size of this pendulum smaller. As when I go to this folder and I check the properties of this pendulum, we can see that it is sort of 400 by 863 dimensions. So what we will do is we'll make this sort of rounded figures, and we'll make the resolution of the this image asset accordingly. We'll make the width of 100, and let's just assume that the height of the image that we're adding was 1000. So basically the resolution of this would become 400 by 1000. So what we'll do is we'll divide that by 4, and that comes out to be 100 by 250. Okay, so we'll just keep those round figures in mind, and here I'll just add a height of 250. So now when I save this, you can see that the pendulum is nice and small here. It sort of completes the space. For your images, you'll always know the width and the height, so you will adjust the width and height of this image asset accordingly. I just wanted to use this in my case, so I just patched that accordingly. And so now what we want to do is we want to add sort of a ticking animation to this. For that, we will use the animation. So starting with this, in the Flutter, there are 3 basic things. There is animation, animation controller, and there are a few other objects like Tween. So animation is basically taking care of only the values. So it knows only the type of animation, the values of the animation that is from 0 to 1 that it takes most of the time. So it basically takes that value from 0 to 1 most of the times, and a type of curve that you want to add it to it. For example, I'll just create a new animation object here. animation. I'll just call this animation, and a new animation controller. I'll call this animation controller. And the animation controller basically controls the views of this whole stateful widget, this state, according to the animation that we want to. The animation object does not itself knows any sort of state of the views in our page. That is all sort of controlled by the animation controller in place of the animation. So what we'll do is, as I go through this lecture, you can understand the whole process in a much better way. So whenever you create a new stateful widget, you need to create a new state, and in each state there is an init function to initialize the state. Okay, so I'll just add above the override, I'll add the init function, init state. This is also an override, so it does need a super method, the super method that refers to this state superclass. Okay, so it calls the init state of the super also. So in this we'll create, okay, in this we'll initiate the animation controller. We'll create a new animation, we'll create a new animation controller. Okay, and the vsync we'll call this. So what the vsync is, basically in Flutter, the frames, most Flutter apps run at 60 frames per second depending upon the capacity of the device. So for each frame, the frames redraw 60 times. For each second, the frames redraw 60 times. So this is for an average app running on these modern devices. So for an older device, it may be 30 frames or 40 frames a second. So we'll take an average app to be a 60 frame per second animation. So the vsync is required for that. It sort of does some internal processing for asynchronous type of things. So we're not gonna go in that. Okay, so you can see that there is a red line under it, so that it does not have any vsync property at this moment, because we want to add a with single ticker provider state mixin. So this is kind of a mouthful, and we want to extend. So basically what we're doing is we are making a home screen state that extends the state of type home screen that uses single ticker provider state mixin. It's quite a mouthful. So you can see that now vsync error is gone. So what we want to add now is we want to add a duration to the animation controller. This is basically the duration of animation that you want to run. So we'll add a new duration of seconds maybe. We'll keep this nice and slow for now. We'll add 5 seconds of animation for now. And for the controller, there is also animation controller dot add listener. So this listener will take a new function. Basically, whenever the animation changes, there is any change in the animation, like for 60 frames per second animation, there will be 60 changes, approximately 60 changes in a second. So that this function will run each time for those for 60 times in a second. Okay, so you do not need to do much heavy stuff here. The applications can handle them, but it is suggested not to do such kind of stuff here. If any calculation can be done prior to it, it is most efficient to do static calculations prior to using in this function. So there is also another function called animation controller.forward. So this is basically the start function for animation controller. When you call this function, the animation will start. Okay, so right now we'll keep this empty, and we'll add set state here. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to initiate this animation object also. So in the build method, I'll call animation, is equal to curved animation. So what this curve animation will do, it does not create any sort of curved animation as you may think. It just takes a parent that is the animation controller and a curve. So basically a curve is nothing but how the values in the animation should change. Okay, so for a linear animation, the values will change from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the infinite value that you want to add. Like for a value from 0 to 1, the values will change from 0 to 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and so on. So for a curve animation, they will take up a different route. Okay, so they'll be adding in a curved way that will represent a curve on a graph. Okay, so what we want to add here is curves dot elastic in out. So this will basically smooth out your animation rather than making it just a linear animation. Okay, I'll show you the difference in real time when we run the app using the animation, but for now you can just understand that curves add those smooth effects to the animation, like elastic in and elastic out. If you have ever used After Effects or any other editing program, you might already know that what are these curves used for. Okay, so at this point we have an animation object that is being initiated to curved animation with a parent of animation controller and a curve that is basically smoothing, and that will be basically smoothing out the animation, and we're using curves dot elastic in out so that we have quite smooth in and out of the animation. So at this point nothing happens in the animation. We're not using any animated values and so on. So what I will do is I'll add animation is equal to tween begin of minus 0.5 and then end of 0.5. So what tween does is, tween is basically, in most cases we don't want our animation to range from 0 to 1. You might want that in case of opacity, but in most of the cases, like if we want to transform any object, we want to animate the width and height. So 0 to 1 values basically have no use in these cases. So tween provides us with the ability to add other values to the animation. For example, numbers, booleans, and doubles, and so on. So we're adding these two values to begin the tween animation from 0.5 value minus 0.5, a negative value, and it takes it ends the animation to a value of 0.5. Okay, so I'll tell you later why we're using these negative 0.5 and 0.5, but for now just hang with this. Okay, so after creating this tween object, it provides us with an animate function. So in the animate, we'll be adding the same animation object that we're initiating. Okay, so basically we're just updating the animation object with the tween object, and then we'll returning this to the animation. We're basically updating the animation object. Okay, at this point our animation object is ready, and we can use the animation controller. Okay, the animation controller is starting, and we have a good clean animation to start. Okay, so now we'll come down to the container. Here we'll add alignment. Okay, so basically there are two types of alignments. One, there is simple alignment that you use to align the objects. Okay, alignment dot center, top center, left center, and all these top center, bottom center, and all these things. And there is fractional offset. Fractional offset. Okay, so let me tell you the difference between these two. Okay, so when you talk about the alignment sort of takes, for example, if this is the container, this hole is a container, the alignment takes the center that is this place as the origin. Okay, so it is not 0, 0, it is this point here. So the alignment aligns object according to this center, for the top left being this corner, top right being this corner, bottom right being this and bottom left being this. Okay, so you understand this basic concept that alignment uses the center of the container as its starting point. So in case of the fractional offset, the fractional offset starts at this point, the top left corner, at the 0, 0 of the container. Okay, it shifts that center point, the 0, 0, to this point here. So how this will help us in this situation is when we set the alignment, we'll change the x value to 0.5 of the current x, and the y value to, we'll keep the y value same, because at this point we want the pendulum to be ticking from this point. If this is the pendulum, let's say, if this is the pendulum, sorry, this is kind of really a rough drawing. If this is sort of the pendulum, then this is the center that we want the pendulum to tick around. Okay, so this is kind of really a worse drawing, but for this case I think it's fine. Okay, so we'll go to the offsets and we'll set the dx to be 0.5 and the y to be 0.0. Okay, so now when I save this, you don't see any change in the animation. Okay, in the view, because we have not yet animated the object, but there is a way to show the alignment. So for this I'll just transform this. Okay, so I'll just add the matrix transform, matrix 4 dot rotation z. Okay, so we'll add a rotation of 0.2 in this case, 0.2. Okay, when I save this, it does take some time to reload. Okay, so there is not at all any change in the view. So what is happening is that we cannot add direct transformations to the container because we want to animate the container itself. The container is containing the image, so animating the container won't animate the image. We want to animate this whole container. Okay, so you'll basically understand this. I'll just save this project here. I have cut those lines and I want to wrap this container with a new object called transform. Okay, I think there is a mistake, so I'll just go here and in the container I'll wrap with a new widget and I'll call this transform. Okay, so transform widget is basically used to transform the child element. Okay, so we're going to be transforming the container that is further containing the image asset. Okay, so in the transform I'll be adding those both properties called align and transform, and when I save this, let the hot reload work. Okay, so now you can see that the angle at which the pendulum was earlier, it was kind of a 90-degree angle, so it has now changed to 0.2 radian. So you can see what radians are if you don't already know. Okay, they're kind of equal. The radian is the angle at which the circumference, the covered arc circumference, is equal to the radius of the circle. So you can check this online and you can learn more about radians there. So we have set this rotation z to 0.2 radian. Okay, so this transforms this container containing the image in a way that it is tilted in a way. So what we will use is we'll use the tween properties, the begin and the end, with negative 0.5 to 0.5. So what we want to do is we want to animate the transformation of this container from negative 0.5 to 0.5, and we'll repeat this animation again and again to use this sort of as a ticking for the container. So rather than passing a static value, what we'll do is we'll pass animation dot value. Okay, so this will take the value of the animation at that point in time and it will animate the object here. Okay, so when I save this, you can see that I need to start this again because the init method is already called here. So what we want to do is, you can see that this was kind of a short animation. So why is this happening? Why isn't the object updating? Okay, so why is this happening? You can see that it sort of updated, but it did not display any change on the screen. So what happens here is, you see that in the animation controller we had an add listener method, but what we are not doing anything here. So what we want to do is, we want to call an empty set state method here, and we don't want to do anything. So basically this set state method will force the state of the object to change, force the whole state of the object to change each frame, each per second. Okay, so it will force the object to update 60 times per second so that it can display the updated animation. Okay, there are many other ways to do this. There are special widgets called animated widgets to do this sort of thing, where we don't have to update the state manually. So we're not going to be going into that because we're discussing the basics of animation. So now when we go to this animation and rerun this, let the reload complete, and hopefully okay, so now we have sort of this sort of elastic animation here. You saw that when I run this again, as the animation is not repeating, so you will see now that there is an elastic animation for the pendulum. But what we want to do is, now we want to repeat this animation. So what we will do, we'll go to the controller. So in the add listen method above the set state, we want to see that when the animation reaches from -0.5, by the way, -0.5 makes the pendulum come here, and the 0.5 makes the pendulum come here. So what we want to do is we want to check that if the controller is if the animation is complete, then we want to reverse the animation, and if the animation is at its starting point again, then we want to rerun the animation. So what we will do is, we'll come here in the add listener above the set state, and here we'll use animation controller dot, if animation controller dot is completed, then what we want to do is, we want to call animation controller dot reverse. Okay, so else if animation controller that is dismissed. So what is dismissed does, so is dismissed is called when the animation is sort of at the starting point of its, at the beginning of its animation again. Okay, so animation has completed but not yet stopped. It is reversed and back to its current its starting point. So what we'll do is, we'll call animation controller dot forward. Okay, so when I save this and the reloading starts, okay, so we will need to restart the application again because we have changed the init state. And okay, so now you can see that the pendulum has started sort of ticking. It's taking some time because we have used that different curve here. So what we want to do is, we want to go up to the curve, elastic in and out. We want to change this to sort of something simple. We'll use bounce in and out, and we'll see how this goes. I'll just run this variation and we'll see what happens. Let the activity restart. Okay, see that these are different kind of animation types, animation curves. So we'll use ease in and out. These sort of work differently in each program. I don't know why. Okay, so this is sort of okay. this is a nice feel here. So what we want to do is we want to decrease the time of the animation. So here in the animation controller, the animation is running for 5 seconds, and we want this to change this to 1 second, so that the pendulum ticks each second here, and we'll run the animation again, run the app again. And when the app reloads, so you can see that the pendulum is ticking really nicely, okay, from the center point up here. So one thing you can notice here is that the pendulum is not ticking from exactly the center here, because there is some gap between the container and the starting of the pendulum. It is not exactly at 0, 0 of y. So what we can do here is, instead of pausing 0.0 at y, here 0.0 at y, we want to take this point to here. Okay, so it will keep the dx to be 0.5, but we'll change the y to 0.2 or 0.1. Okay, so I'll change this 0.2 for now, and when I save this, I need to start this again. Okay, so 0.2 is seeming to be a bit much, so I'll change that to 0.1, and I'll save this. Okay, so now you can see that it is perfect, that we can see that the pendulum is sort of ticking from this nail here. Okay, so this is the basic animation that we can do to these do such sort of things. There is much more to animation in Flutter, but these are kind of the basics. We basically use an animation controller to control the animation. The animation object sort of takes care of the values. It does not know anything about the state of the widget. It just knows the values that it is being played through. Okay, so we initiate the animation object here in the build method. There are many other ways to do this. I'm just taking this route basically to explain the basics of animation in Flutter. Okay, so we initiate the animation with a curved animation that sort of uses a curve to smooth it out. Okay, so we are using a curved animation, and we're passing the parent as an animation controller here to control the animation, and further we're using a tween to sort of map the values, so that we can use other values except 0 to 1. For example, we are using -0.5 to 0.5 for the radius, for the radian of the angle. And we can also use some sort of dimensions like 0 to 100 if we want to transform a container from 0 pixel and 0 pixel to 100 pixel and 100 pixels. So there are a lot of other uses of tween. I encourage you to learn more about tween at flutter.io docs. Okay, so the tween gives us an animate function that in turn returns an animation. Okay, so we're using this sort of method here. Okay, what we want to do now is, as we have ourselves a complete animation, what we want to do is that we want to change the font of this this sort of clock. So here we'll do that. We'll add a new folder here. We'll go to the project, we'll call new, and we'll create a new directory, and I'll just call this fonts. In the fonts, I do have a few fonts here called Berlin, and in the Berlin I'll just copy this, Berlin X bold, and I'll just copy this from here, and I'll just add them here in the fonts folder in the project directory, and I'll just rename this from refactor rename Berlin _x bold, and I'll save this. So now I'll go to the pubspec.yaml file, and I just want to uncomment this font section. So I'll uncomment this, and I'll just set the indentation of the fonts. The indentation is sort of an issue. It's really an issue when you just mistakenly just change the indentation even by a little bit and the whole app crashes. So what we want to do is under this fonts section, we want to add a font family and fonts underneath it. So there are always examples in the pubspec.yaml file so that you can look at them and just add your fonts accordingly. So at this point I want to add our fonts lie here in the fonts directory, so I'll just call this Berlin _x _bold.tdf. okay, so I'll just change the font family from that to Berlin, and I'll save this. Okay, so pubspec file is saved correctly, and I'll get dependencies here so that I don't see that top bar anymore. And now how to use those fonts inside the app. So for this we have theme property here. I want to add a comma there, and in the theme we want to add theme data, and there the theme data does have another property. You can see that there are a bunch of properties here. What we want to use is we want to use font family, and we'll mention Berlin exactly the way that is being mentioned in the pubspec.yaml file here, Berlin with a capital B. And I'll save this and I'll run the app again. Okay, so it does take some time to run, and you can see that just a second. Okay, I think that there is some spacing issue because we have increased the size of that object so much. So what I do is we want to go here down, and we want to change this to 60, and I'll save this, and you can see that the clock is ticking again. Basically what happened was that the size of the text increased so much that the app wasn't able to display this clock here. So the clock in the app bar, the text in the app bar is sort of really small here. So what we want to do is we want to go to the app bar, and in the text I want to add some style, text style, and I'll just add a font size of 20.0, and I'll just save this and see what happens. As the app reloads, there is not much difference. I'll change that to 32, and I'll save that, and yeah, the clock is looking really good now. Clock 17:41, and the clock is ticking. So this wraps up this tutorial, and we have basically learned how to use the date and time object in Flutter, how to use the transform, how to use the alignment in a much better way, how to use the animation in Flutter. And so we have created this beautiful clock here. It's not kind of the most beautiful clock, but it does the job for us. So I hope you learned a lot in this tutorial, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, peace and have a great new year.